Welcome to this very special podcast this month from the Voices community, obviously, brought to you by Sunrise Studios for Black History Month, hosted by Patch, and he's speaking to this week with Harry, Dion, and Wes. And if further ado, let's get into this week's podcast.
Hello and welcome to an all-new exciting podcast brought to you by Access Community Trust and produced by Sunrise Studios. My name is Patrick Johnson, otherwise known as Patch. I'm a digital marketing apprentice for Access Community Trust, and I'll be hosting, in inverted commas, today's episode. Without further ado, it's time to meet today's fantastic guests, so let's go around the table, and if you could please state your name, where you're from, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Access as a charity.
Hi, I'm Dion and I'm Head of Young People's Services at Access, and I've been here for about 7 months, and I lead on all of the young person's services that we offer and develop in our provision in the community. Before that, I was in education and studied sociology, so these topics are really close to my heart.
Hi, I'm Wesley and I'm a Young Person Service Coordinator for Access and a HRS Lead. I've been here for about 18 months now, and I've worked under sort of every bracket that Access covers. I don't think there's anything that I haven't done at this point.
My name's Perry, and I'm one of the youth workers on the Young People's team. I've been working with Access for about 4 months. I come from a retail management background and lived in London for the last 10 years. And yeah, for the last year I've been volunteering and stuff for lots of charities, and here I am now.
Lovely. And in today's episode, we are supporting and celebrating Black History Month. We're doing this by having an open discussion with some of the charity's current employees. We're going to be talking about Black history, the experience of living in Norfolk and Suffolk, standing up to racism, and where we can possibly go from here in terms of our future. So the first topic of discussion I've got for everyone today is Black History Month. It's recently a thing in the UK. It's been for about 30 years, I think, overall. But what do those words mean to you guys? What does Black History Month mean to you? Is there anything or anyone that would like to start off with that?
I'd be really interested to start because I think my experience of Black History Month started when I was a teenager. I can remember, I lived and grew up in Ipswich, and so I can remember when Black History Month first got started, and I was about 17 and studying A-level sociology, really interested in ethnic diversity and my own experience, but also sociologically what ethnic minority experience had been like. So I can remember at the time I was doing my sociology coursework and I was studying Stephen Lawrence and the Macpherson report that came out after that, and institutional racism. I was doing my own research around it. So then all of a sudden Black History Month came up, and I was invited because of that research to go along to like the start of it in the Ipswich Town Hall. And Stephen Lawrence's mum was the keynote speaker that first year, so it was massive. And I think it gives me goosebumps thinking about it now, because it was an inspiring moment for me to have studied and known that event in history inside out and back to front, and understood how that had impacted on the Black community, to then see her stood there and hear her strength and hear her dedicate her life's work from that point on towards fighting for equality. That was massive for me, and so that was a really pivotal point in my life, really, in terms of me understanding what Black history meant, because that was the first time that I had had any recognition in my life of Black experience being different to white experience. And I'd grown up with a Black mum, white dad, and kind of straddled those two communities for those 17 years that I'd been around. And this was the first time that really I'd had a chance to reflect and say, do you know what? Actually, the experience of the Black side of my family is very different to that of the white side of my family. So that was really important for me. And I think because of that, I've been really aware of how Black History Month has been picked up and grown and developed over time, across the time when I was working in education and I was able to bring some Black history into education for young people, but also for my children as well, seeing how they experience it as well. So I think Black History Month for me, if I were in charge, I probably wouldn't call it Black History Month, because I think it's more than just history. I think it's much more than just history now. But I feel as though Black History Month is a really important month for me and for my family and for my community. and I'm always really interested to see how it is perceived and how people treat it in the media as well, because I think that changes each year, and I think that's changed massively this year because of everything that we've been through over the last couple of years too. So Black History Month, I think, is more than just history to me, but it's really, really important, and I think it's really important that we talk about it from through our different lenses.
What a great answer as well.
Thanks.
Has anyone else got a follow up from that?
I can try. To be honest, it's kind of a bit overwhelming because Black History Month has always been a bit of a foggy / awkward conversation. And again, it goes back to Dion saying that it's something that shouldn't be specifically Black History Month. But I always go back to school and think Black History Month was the month where you had to do Black history, even though you could kind of tell that no one wanted to really talk about it that much. And it wasn't that they didn't care, it's that maybe they didn't know themselves, or they didn't know what they could or couldn't say. You know, we live in a world of cancel culture now, and the teacher's terrified to say the wrong thing, to have 3 angry mums or dads at the school saying that they said this when this is politically incorrect. I think it's that gap of knowledge from that point of view as to why it was kind of, right, this month for your 3 history lessons, we're doing Black history, open your books to this page, read it and write what you think. There was never any sort of in-depth discussion that there was about good old Henry VIII. I think we all learned about 47 times. I can tell you everything about that guy. But there's certain things in sort of the culture or the sort of group that I grew up in and am part of that I have no idea. And especially like Dion was saying, the last 2 years, it's opened my eyes because I thought I knew a lot about Black history. And it's only when we've had the last couple of incidents in the last couple of years, and let's be honest, we've all had a bit of time to just slow down, that we've kind of taken the time to go, well, actually, what is this thing that they're talking about? Or what actually is this? Because I grew up in a white household. So it was really interesting that in my house, I was the black one. So kind of no one else knew that much about it to educate me on it either. So I'd come home with Black history homework. The teacher probably thought I was going to absolutely nail it. And I'd have a white Irish mum trying to teach it to me. So I'd go back and the teacher was thinking, what? Did he not talk to his parents? Because they're obviously black. So why hasn't he spoken to them about it? But yeah, Black History Month for me is always a bit of a tricky one, because sometimes you get it where there's a lot that you can learn and there's a lot to be spoken about, and then sometimes it comes around and people are kind of like, let's just go quiet for a couple of weeks, let that one blow over, and then Christmas and Halloween, and let's talk about everything else that's really fun. It's a tricky subject, and it's conversations that we've started having that we have to carry on having. And again, I don't think it should be Black history. I think British history over the last however many years, of course we've had big important things like World War I and World War II and Henry VIII, but there's been a lot of things that have happened around different cultures. And why is it that it's nailed into just 1 month when really it should just be British history that's taught across the year, not sort of 1 month, right, everything we did, forget now because we're going back to doing medicine or something else like that. So yeah, that's pretty much what it means for me.
That's pretty interesting, to be honest, because like you say about it being sort of forced upon the majority of your classmates at school, and that created a sort of, would you say, like they weren't as keen to do it as opposed to something that's brought in and made fun?
I think there was 3 in my class. There was 3 young black men, and we were sort of expected to be the experts on it because of what it was, and we weren't. But that's kind of what we were expected to do. So it's not so much the fun element. I think it is that it's an uncomfortable conversation to have, because most of the Black history or a good percentage of the Black history in this country isn't necessarily positive towards everyone.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is sometimes the difficulty. It's talking about, you know, your ethnic minority or ethnic background has done a bad thing to another one. How do I talk to someone who was on the other side of the fence about this without them thinking that I agree with what happened, or that I'm trying to go over and beyond to show that I disagree with it? That's kind of what I felt anyway.
I think you're right. I think from an education perspective, I think as a teacher, you've got to be really confident and comfortable with dealing with the questions that come up. And when you're in a certain subject and you teach a certain subject and you do that curriculum year after year, you become really confident and comfortable with answering whatever questions can come up. But if it's about something that feels alien to you and you can't easily empathise with being part of that group, or you don't necessarily know what the answers are, you've got to be really confident as a practitioner to be able to field those questions and say, do you know what, that hasn't happened to me, but maybe we should try and find out the answers from somewhere else, or we need to look at this from a different perspective, or get people who do know to be able to train teachers to feel more comfortable about it. Bigger than that, in the wider scheme of things, we need to have more ethnic diversity within our schools in terms of our senior teachers and our senior leaders. We need to have people leading education and establishments who get it and understand it and can deal with it and support in a way that makes it more accessible, because actually we can't expect every frontline teacher to be able to answer these questions. It's just not possible. But I think there is definitely a gap in terms of how it's dealt with in schools because of that lack of kind of experience and understanding.
And I think it's one of those where I think most of us forget when teachers go to uni, they normally specify in something, not teaching. It's normally a certain thing. So, some history teachers have got a history degree, but their history degree might be in a specific part of history like they normally are. 95% of people aren't going to pick Black history as the thing to finish their sort of degree with, because there's so many different... It's the same with 95% of people aren't going to pick Egyptian history or Roman history or any type, because it's such a broad spectrum. And then you go to this teacher, right, okay, you've got to do this, which is going to be every year, but you've also got to do this for a month and fit that around everything else, as well as exams and different things like that as well.
Oh, well, we have got to hear from you, Perry. What does Black history mean to you?
So Black history for me is really a celebration of my heritage. Also my mum is Black and my dad is white. So even to begin with, I'm always questioned with, people don't know if to say, are you Black or are you white? I am Black, I'm a Black woman, and I'm very proud of that. And we definitely embrace where we come from. We come from St. Kitts, which is a very, very small island in the Caribbean. And it's about knowing where I came from. And definitely in my everyday life, I try and educate other young people as well, and my experiences where I come from. And, those tricky questions that you mentioned about people don't know how to kind of talk about it, that awkward kind of... It's not about being sensitive, because if someone asks me a question, I'll be very open. Like Dion said, what are our experiences with it? And if we haven't experienced it, we can find like an alternative. But definitely, it has to be educated in the schools first. And like we said, Dion said about renaming Black History Month. I believe that also, because it isn't about not being white, along with Black Lives Matter. It's not about not being white. It's just we're trying to make people aware and talk about these sensitive issues so that we can move forward in creating a better world, a more diverse world, a more inclusive world for the younger people. Because if we cannot learn from about the mistakes that we've made from before, how can we move forward better as a population, And
For that sort of like collective understanding, there needs to be like on every type of person needs to sort of understand Black history in its entirety, whether that's even the bad side of white history, and there's a lot of it that comes into it. Everyone needs to know about that, and you shouldn't. I think it is a tricky one, because I think when you're a youngster in school, you're probably struggling with the idea of like identity and like who you want to be and where you're from. Like I don't really think I'd ever researched where I was from for the whole time of my school life, and I think that's part of a privilege as a white person, because you're not posed those questions in life. You don't really have to think about it, I wouldn't say, but it's really interesting. Was there a moment in school for you which, because I know Dion said when she was 17, it really clicked that this is the passion that you want to go down?
Definitely. I think because it probably came to a point there because I was studying a subject which started to unpick it. So I started to think about it much more. And in sociology, especially in the A-level curriculum, there's a lot about ethnicity, and lots of things are broken up, and we look at the good, the bad and the ugly. And I think a lot of my experiences have come back to that. But I think in school, I went to a school that was predominantly white, and it was a massive school as well. And so in a year group of 250 to 300 kids, there were like 3 of us who were not white. So when you sit in that massive hall for an assembly, you've got white teachers all stood down the side. I was never taught by a teacher who wasn't white in my whole school career. It was once I got to uni that I had somebody who was educating me who was non-white. But I sat in that hall of like 300 people, and there were 3 of us across the whole of that room who didn't have a white face. And you stand out. So you get used to standing out. And so I think because I'd had that, even through primary school, there were 2 of us then at that stage, and there was another mixed race girl. And so they used to get us mixed up to the point where at one parents' evening, my friend's mum sat down for parents' evening. They started talking about me to her, and she got really, really mad, as you would, and just kind of said, I'm going to have to stop you, but you've mixed up my child for the other non-white child in the year group. And I mean, that was mad.
That is shocking.
And obviously I didn't learn about that until I was older. And so, and even then when she told me about it, she was still really, really mad about it, because you would be. But you get used to that. You get used to those experiences, and you shouldn't get used to those experiences, but it's a very real experience of people in that position. And so I think it clicked for me at that moment when I was 17, because I'd had all of those experiences. I'd not consciously thought about those experiences, but then I started to learn more about society and community and ethnic minorities and the differences, and it became much more of a reflection point for me then. I think I then had the tools to reflect and look at it and think, do you know what, all of these things that I've experienced, these aren't happening to other people. But you don't know that because you're surrounded by other people who are like that. My sister was in exactly the same position. My cousins are in the same position because they're all mixed race too. So it was only at that point that I really had the tools and the capacity, I guess, to be able to reflect and see that that wasn't a normal experience. So that's why it kind of happened for me then.
I think if Black history is taught in the syllabus while children are young, then the awareness of it when you grow up is going to be more obvious and you learn to. But if it's not taught at a young age, we know as older adults, we become ignorant to learning new things.
Yeah.
So that's why people tend to just, if that is their behaviour from a young age, that kind of follows in later life. But if it's taught early on, honestly, it could be so much. We shouldn't have to have, like you said, we shouldn't have to have a Black History Month just to celebrate. We have 1 month to kind of just celebrate our culture, our heritage. But it shouldn't be like that.
I think I remember reading in preparation for the podcast that one of the first people to like slam Black History Month was Morgan Freeman. Like he came out and said, this is just unnecessary. I don't know what this is for. It's a Black History life. It's a Black History year. Like it's that sort of level. But another thing that you made me think of was obviously learning about it in school was a big thing. But when you say you were one of only a handful, if that, of Black people in that school, did that and that lack of being taught, did that breed a sort of culture of racism or negativity in any way? Like,
I have an interesting story for this one.
Okay.
Sit back.
Take your seats. Make sure you have a drink. You
You're
don't
sitting
need-
comfortably.
So there was, I think in my school year of, again, 200-300 people, there was, I think, 5 Black men or boys. So that the 3 schools nearest, and I'll never drop names, it's not fair, but the 3 schools nearest decided between them, there was 1 or 2 sort of mixed race teachers or Black teachers, and they decided to set up a group to try and give these young Black men the tools to carry on in everyday life. You know, the things that shouldn't be relevant and shouldn't happen, but do. And we can all say that they shouldn't, and we know they shouldn't, but they do. And that's the harsh reality. So what they did is they sort of picked a day per, I think it was per fortnight or per month, where the kids or the boys specifically of an ethnic minority would come out of class and would go somewhere with the same from the other school and the other school, and they'd get us all together in like a big team of young Black people. And it became a thing of trying to educate us, like I said, on the difficulties we're going to face and trying to educate us on why these difficulties are going to be things we face. It's a little bit of a problem when there is only 4 or 5 in a school or in a class. because what it then became to all of, for example, our friends that weren't black was Black Club. And that became a bit of a headache because you then had 5 kids getting taken out of history, science, maths, whatever, once a month for Black Club. And then you had, well, why can't I go out? Because I'm not necessarily black, but my granddad is from St. Kitts, but because I'm 2nd or 3rd generation, I don't look black. Does that mean I won't face those problems? And then it became a point where we were getting asked by our friends, well, what do you do? Do you go and sit and watch black films? Or do you eat black food? Or do you discuss black culture? It started to bother me. So I spoke to my mum, who I said is white and Irish, and said that this thing that they're trying to do is kind of having a negative impact. And it was never set up for that. But that's what ultimately ended up happening. So my mum marched up to the school and demanded I be taken out of this group of segregation, because why is it that only black men are going to have police problems or problems with this or problems with that? So I then got taken out of Black Club, which then made a bigger issue because it was, okay, well, you were in Black Club and you got kicked out. Are you not black enough now for Black Club? Did they vote and kick you out? Like, why aren't you in Black Club but all the other blacks are? But you then had all of like my sort of people that I know, my mates that were in Black Club, saying, why aren't you allowed to come? Do you not want to be black? Are you not one of us? So from something trying to be a really good thing, it kind of spiraled quite drastically into a tricky situation for the school to try and navigate, let alone me, who wasn't sure where I fitted in the first place, and now has been in both sides of the camp, as it were, but don't know again, well, should I be going to Black Club?
Did it make it worse then, would you say, about...
It finished pretty quickly afterwards. The whole thing was sort of pulled apart quite quickly afterwards, which is a shame because, like I said, ultimately it was set up with, the right intentions. It was set up to try and help young men that would face things that statistically we're more likely to face. But it just, kids don't have a filter. Kids see brown man leaving class, why am I not? Oh, brown man in other class left, why am I not? All the brown people go together. What are they doing there, kind of thing? So yeah, it was set up with great intentions, and like I said, didn't end the way it should have ultimately.
Wow, do you have anything similar to that, or is that just a one-off? Maybe, I don't know.
I haven't heard of it happen again, but I heard of things like in other schools they put on like an after-schools class for different things like that. So, but I don't know if you guys have ever seen anything like that at all.
I just wonder what if you weren't with a teacher and you boys were at Black Club and you was just going in between, say, a building, what would you be discriminated for when you're trying to do good? That could be classified as, well, not classified, but what would...
I think the word gang would slip out once or twice.
I did it.
Yeah.
I think it'd be there's a gang of young men all of a sudden, and it wasn't. I mean, out of the 5 black young men that were in my year at school, I think everyone went to uni apart from me. Most of us did really well in our GCSEs and A-levels and did really well in life. One of my friends works and lives in London. I know another one does a similar job to me. Another one is doing a lot within sort of like the music industry. So that they're all doing really positive things for themselves. I think one of them's nearly a doctor now. But back then, just because of the way we looked, it would have been considered, that's a gang. So.
I didn't have anything like that, but I think that is partly down to gender as well. I think there's always going to be nuances in people's experience and dependent on lots of different characteristics and factors, but certainly my experience when I was a teacher was that there was quite a lot. It was at a time where there was quite a lot of funding around to support ethnic minority young boys as well, because statistically they were seen to be underperforming and overrepresented in prisons and all of this kind of stuff. And so that's where a lot of the money was going. And so there was a lot more support. I say support actually, because I'm not really convinced of the actual quality or the motives of that. But I think there was more aimed at boys than there was girls because of that kind of the statistics behind it. I definitely didn't have Black Club to go to. To be fair, there weren't enough of us to warrant a Black Club, even if they'd gone across a few schools at that point. Yeah. I don't think there would have been enough of us to have a Black Club. But when I was there as a teacher, though, there were more of those kind of things around.
we've talked a little bit about that school experience. I can sort of, as a white man who was at school in Suffolk, can definitely say that I think for me there was a culture of, I wouldn't say outright racism, but definitely, I mean, yeah, it's still racism. It's like those subtle things and people must have been staring and stuff, and like maybe like the little passive comments and stuff as well. I don't know if that, it was never really dealt with at my school, I don't think. And I think it ended up negatively impacting a lot of people like me, because until probably 14, 13, I really sort of woke up to realising that the N-word is something that that's not me. I can't say that. It's not, I've got no right at all to be saying that. And it's quite almost a shameful thing to say, because before then, in that school environment, it was kind of like, as all swear words and all naughtiness goes in school, it was kind of just a thing. Like, did you have any sort of thoughts on that at school, and like any experiences that really just made you think, wow, like, why is this happening? I don't know.
Still happens now. Like, and again, going back to like the subtle racism, is that sometimes it's not even from a malicious place. I'm sure you two have both had it. You know, I do a lot of sport. I remember a couple of years ago I was playing football, first game for a new team. Bloke put the ball down the wing and I ran after it because I'm fairly quick. And after the game, I went, yeah, I knew I could play that ball in there. I knew you'd be quick. And it's like, oh yeah, wait, wait, what? Like you don't think of what they've said. And it's shit that it happens, let's be honest, but it is one of those things. But yeah, it's the casual racism that, again, isn't meant to be malicious. He didn't mean anything nasty by that comment. Of course he didn't. If anything, it was a compliment. But you kind of like, you could have just said, oh, good run. Or, you know, you didn't have to emphasise the fact that because I'm black, I'm going to be quick.
Athletic,
because we're not all athletic or quick. So yeah, that's something that happens, I still think, today. Let alone sort of in school, it happens in day-to-day life. I'm sure, like I said, you two probably get the same as well.
Yeah, definitely. From a parent perspective, I feel like that's where my focus is, particularly around the N-word, because my son is really into types of music that will have it in a lot and have loads of different swearing in. And so we have to have this conversation about it. And he is 10 now, and he totally understands exactly what the term means, where it's come from, how it's been used. He gets all of that and he knows that it's bad. But we'll every so often have a conversation where he'll say, or he'll see a music video that goes with a song, and he'll say, but that person's black, so why are they using that word? And so then we'll have to have a conversation around it. And my feeling around that is, I understand and I mean, in history, when you kind of get to know a little bit about me when I say this, but as I was doing my sociology coursework around Stephen Lawrence, I was also doing my history coursework around black music and how black music has had an impact on modern music at the time, which was a little while ago, so it's not that modern anymore. But we'll just gloss over that. But so that was what I was kind of exploring at the time. And so I understand the development of reclaiming the term and wanting to make it a black term again. But from my personal perspective, I hate it. I can't bear to hear it. It doesn't matter whose mouth it comes out of. I can't even read it sometimes. Yeah. And my daughter's been talking about it recently as well, and they're learning. They're doing a lot around lots of different issues, but particularly around racism at the moment. And we were having a conversation about how, and actually just seeing it written and reading it and saying it in your head, it just feels really, really uncomfortable. Because when you understand where it's come from, everything to do with it just feels so derogatory, and there's so much shame, and it's such a loaded term.
It's degrading term.
It's degrading. And so I think I really struggle with music that's got it in, because I mean, in some ways I'm quite pleased that it gives me the opportunity to have that conversation with my children, because I think it's really important that we have that conversation and they understand where it's come from and they understand my reaction to it, because they will see a really visceral reaction. I don't like hearing it, or even if I know that it's been censored and I know that that's a word, it just feels really, really uncomfortable. But having that conversation with my children is really important, and having that conversation more broadly, I think, is really important. But my standard reaction to it is I just hate it. It doesn't matter who's saying it. I just hate it. It just feels like the worst term you could use. You could swear at me and use so many other terms, but if you use that, I am gonna. That's where you're gonna unleash the inner Hulk in Dion. That you don't. There are not many situations where that would happen, but that would be the one thing.
Because definitely that word I associate with black slavery.
Yeah.
And the term of, as such, a white master speaking to his black slaves that were farmers, cooks, cleaners, all these things. So when they use it in music, I love music, and I will listen to rap, hip hop, R&B, reggae, classical music I even had in the car on the way home yesterday. I listen to a range of music. But when young people, because most of the time is young people that the younger generation now look up to as idols, when they're using that word in music, it makes it acceptable for somebody else to, but it's not. And that's why I don't like it in music, when they have such what's the word? When they have such a big influence on young people now, so it's like almost like you think it's okay when people, like, I know something that's happened recently where there was a young white female and there's a TikTok video and it is a black artist song and he uses that word. And this young girl posted this TikTok video saying this word, and some black boys said, why is this girl using this word in this TikTok? You don't understand. And there was a discussion where these people met, this white girl and these black boys met up, and they were able to air that out. But this girl could not understand why it wasn't acceptable. But because she's heard it in music, she thinks it's acceptable. But they've got to completely eradicate this word. It's
difficult because I actually, on the word, completely agree with you both. But I know there is a lot of people that will use the other argument of if you skirt around a word or don't use a word, then when that word is used, it gives it power. I know there's a lot of different musicians. I can't remember exactly who it was, but I know there was somebody that came out and said, the reason he uses it so liberally in songs and so freely is because the more we use it, the less power it has. And I think that's an argument that will go on until we're all long gone. And I think it's the same as other words that people don't want or do want to use. Is as generations sort of go up, it will either be a word that's normalised in their vocabulary for that group and then not for the group before it or after it. And I don't know if any of you on the word ever had the black pencil incident. I can't remember the name of the brand where it says the name of the colour and then it says it in Spanish. Does anyone know what the Spanish for black is?
Yes, yeah.
So when you're in class, I vividly remember that. People were like, oh, well, I can just say it. And we had a whole issue and a big assembly when the 3 black guys were pointed out kind of thing. and the only black teacher had to do a presentation, which ultimately you can see she didn't want to do. But she
had a black teacher?
We had one. She was a geography teacher.
She was wheeled out for that one.
Yeah, she was a geography teacher. She was amazing. But yeah, and they were kind of, all these kids were kind of like, well, we can say it, it's just what's on the pen. If you can say rouge for red, then I can say that. And it's like, you listen here, you have a point, but you don't. You know what you're trying to do. Like, that's like me saying something like, for example, say there's a certain word that really upsets you, and, someone drives past that happens to be wearing that thing, and I go, oh, that person's wearing that kind of thing. I'm saying it because it's happening, but I'm using it as an excuse to upset you or to say it.
It becomes an easy excuse, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think a big part of that is just maturing and growing up, like realising that it's not just a game, it's not just a bit of fun. Like, it can be so damaging to someone. And I think one example I can think of was I lived with a guy from Estonia at uni, and that is the same case. In his language, black translates exactly to it. Yeah. And he was... Freshers Week, he was like dishing it out on nights out almost. He didn't actually mean it wasn't coming from a horrible place, but he got into like a big altercation in a smoking area once, and for him it was just going home, and he didn't it didn't blow up or anything, no fighting or anything, but swear my life. But but yeah, I think he just went home and realised that he he got introspective about it and was like, actually, why was that person so enraged by what I said? And then slowly, after 3 or 4 months pass, he realised. And so I think everyone goes through that little stage of maturing, and I think that's the word I'd describe it as.
It's the education, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can't expect. You can't expect. You can, but there's a saying kind of thing, isn't there? You can't expect, for example, a family to educate their children. Say you've got a completely white family. You can't expect those parents to completely educate those children on every history and the meaning behind every word. Yeah, okay, there is certain things that they should be told. But again, it's probably one of those, and I found with some of my mates that they, especially in sort of primary and early high school, would ask why they can't say it. Because no one at home had that conversation. But you can't blame them for not having that conversation, because when is that word going to come up in an all-white household over dinner? It's not a normal word that's just going to pop up in... What did you do today? Oh, well, I was in the coffee shop and there was a such in front of me. Like, it's just not a normalised word. So it's not going to pop up like that. So there is a sort of... I find sort of like a duty to educate anyone that I come across on why it shouldn't be used, but the argument of why some people choose to use it. And I think that's a big thing, is that some people choose to. I think we've all kind of said that we, especially with music, don't really agree that it should be, but it is. And it's one of those things that's that person's choice too.
Yeah, you've got to respect it. Really.
All you can do is educate people on why, okay, he's written that in lyrics, but the reason a certain person may not be able to use it in a TikTok or when they're reciting that song, this is why you can't do that kind of thing.
But I think it's also really important to recognise that it doesn't fall to the black community to educate everyone else. And that's the same with any kind of inequality or difference in experience. As an organisation, we talk about lived experience on a daily basis, and that impacts on what we do all the time. But we shouldn't expect black communities to be educating us on their experience solely, because actually I think, if anything, Black History Month should be the one time of the year, it should happen all year, but specifically Black History Month, we should be encouraging everybody to reflect on their own experience, their own privileges, their own gaps in understanding, which I think is something we've talked about a lot, and that's why we've ended up with this podcast, really, because we want to take the moment to say, do you know what, it's not just about black people educating anybody who's not black around what their experience is. It's about taking responsibility for your own role in the community and recognising that I don't necessarily understand this, so I need to go out and seek the information or seek the support to find it. And that's not about finding your closest black friend to say, can you teach me about what it's like to be black, please? Because that's not how it works. But that's why Black History Month is important. I think that's why so much of our conversation already has been about education, because education has got a massive place in that, a massive role to play. I think us, as being a youth work team, we've also got a part to play in that, because young people are going to learn from us within the community informally, and they're potentially going to engage with us much more than they would their teachers potentially. So I think anybody who's working with young people, anybody who's working in the community, has a responsibility to encourage people to reflect on this and to challenge behaviours and language and ideas, because if we give into that cancel culture that you were talking about, and if we don't create safe spaces to have conversations and ask questions, then we're not going to move forward.
It's a difficult conversation, isn't it?
It is, but we all have to have difficult conversations in order to grow and to move forward and to challenge the status quo.
Love that quote as well. But well, that was another question I had about another bullet point I've got is challenging racism, and you've obviously touched on it a lot there. But what can we do? Is there a right way to go about things? Does challenging racism take loads of different forms, or is it as simple as seeing some, EDL protest or something, and standing up to them and just saying what you're doing? Does it have to be like that, or is it more about reading and educating yourself? And
I think it needs to be a multifaceted approach, and I think that organisations and the infrastructure within society, the government and the different organisations that make up that bigger infrastructure have a massive part to play, because as much as we're being bombarded with the idea that there's not institutional racism in this country, I think we would all agree that that's laughable. And I think that there are macro changes that need to be made that none of us sitting around this table can make. But I think we all, as individuals in society, whether we're black or not, have a responsibility to do what we can to challenge perceptions, to challenge people who are racist. And like I say, that doesn't necessarily, and it shouldn't be, just the black people or non-white people in our community who are making that challenge. But I would say it's not about being a superhero. It's not about going and putting yourself in a position of danger to go and make a point. I think there are lots of ways that you can make a point. I think there are lots of ways that you can support and help to develop. But I don't think there's any one approach that is going to solve this problem. It's it's a part of our history. If we pull apart this country and go back to where this begins, it's absolutely a part of the foundations of this country, and it's going to take way longer than any of our lifetimes to really start to see any significant progress. But that's not to say that we shouldn't do it. All progress takes tiny little steps, and I think we're all responsible for playing a part in that in whatever way we can. I think we have to reflect at this point in time and think, okay, well, what can I do in my position in the community? What can I support or get involved in? Or what privileges do I have in my role that I could actually use for good? Like the fact that you came up with the idea of doing this and came to me and said, what can we do? How can we talk about this? How can we educate and challenge people? I think we all need to be looking at where we are, what resources we have available, what opportunities we have available where we can challenge. And I think that's really important.
You know what I fear in regards to challenging racism? Something I'm always terrified when it comes to having conversation around racism. Being sort of typecast as the angry black guy.
Oh, God, yeah.
It's the worst thing where if I say something to a person and they get angry about it, people 9 times out of 10 can understand if it's something serious why they're angry. And I found it really, really, really difficult last year around George Floyd and all of the protests that happened then to not be the angry black guy, because there were so many of them. There was, and rightly so. People have a right to be angry about these things, but what you sort of happens is if you get people that don't really want to listen or will just go, oh, it's just another angry black man talking about racism, that they just switch off from the conversation. That's sort of I found, even within like my family and friends structure, having the conversation was kind of, they were uncomfortable and scared to approach me about it because they thought they were going to get met with rage. And sometimes just going, no, I'm not angry about it. I'm upset about the things that happen. I'm upset about the things that still happen. I'm upset that whenever I choose to have kids, if I do, they're more than likely going to have the same problems and speed bumps that I've had in my life because of it. I'm not angry about it, because being angry about it doesn't, okay, in extreme circumstances can get things fixed, but is it fixed in a healthy way? Or is it fixed in a way of, okay, well, we know we can't talk about that because he's going to shout again? That's the biggest fear for me with racism, is that stereotype of the angry black guy.
And yeah, I'd say that is one of the biggest stereotypes I see. I'd probably say that, or angry black guy, angry black woman. It's like, I think from what you're saying about the George Floyd thing, like that was in a way like that was almost a moment where people were just had enough. That was like it did kind of pop a little bit. But as far as everything I saw, that was a peaceful. It was a peaceful protest. Everything I saw across the media was a peaceful protest, apart from sections of the media that painted it differently. And I think
they were in every right. Every person that stood up and protested is in every right to be there and be part of that, to try and change it, because that was someone that had a duty of care for people. And I said, like, having higher people that are in these jobs are meant to be looking after people, and that was just racial discrimination at its worst, completely. And I wish I was there. I wish I could have done more. And I think we need to learn from that, and where we can take this now in schools, even in the youth clubs that we currently do, to educate these people on why that wasn't acceptable and why the reason why they were protesting, you know?
Yeah.
Because, like you said, they're going to just think that's just angry people, angry black people.
Chip on their shoulder,
Yeah.
that term. Oh,
Yeah.
just reminds me of growing up. Black people with a chip on their shoulder. That was always like the stereotype
Black women with an opinion
Yeah.
is angry.
Yeah, it has to be angry.
You know,
It can't be an educated conversation. It has to be angry on.
but it's or black women with attitude,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
and that's not attitude. I have my opinion just as well as somebody else, but
And just because
the
that
colour
makes
of
you
my
feel uncomfortable, what I'm telling you, that doesn't make me angry.
But you have to challenge in these ways for people to. It doesn't mean that we're just angry. It's just we're trying to tell you what is politically correct. And
I think my personality growing up was massively affected by that as well. We were talking earlier before we started this about the kind of chameleon effect and how I think for me it was due to the fact that I was brought up in a household where my mum's black and my dad's white, and I never kind of fit into either of those wholly. And then you become a part of this year group where you're a face that stands out. You have to learn to fit in and kind of play down certain characteristics about you when you're in a certain group, or you play up other certain characteristics when you're with them. And I think that affected my personality, and I think that probably made me less likely to challenge because of that, not wanting to be seen in a certain stereotypical way. I wanted to just fit in. I didn't want to be Dion who was black or Dion who was fit in this black stereotype. I just wanted to be one of the crowd.
And now, like in the job that you...
And now I think it's probably meant that that's all been bottled up for so long that I'm now like, right, come on then, we're going to get some more ethnic minority in here. We're going to do some work with these groups because they need this support, and we're going to listen to these voices, and we're going to make sure they're heard and that they're amplified. And so and like I said, when I got to A-level, the whole of my A-level study was around understanding black culture and black identity, because I then started to feel confident enough as a person that I wanted to understand more about that side of me. And so, yeah, it's definitely had an impact, and I think will always have an impact, and it's had an impact on the way I parent as well, because 2 out of 3 of my children don't look black. My oldest daughter looks very much like me and has a similar skin colour, but my younger 2, they don't even look black. It's only because my youngest has got super, super curly hair that you would think that there's
something going on
black
there.
in her, is what my family would say. So you wouldn't even notice, but that has then affected how I bring them up and how we talk about our family culture, because I want them to understand where it comes from, and I want them to have more of an understanding and to talk to me more about their identity, because I didn't necessarily have those conversations growing up, and there weren't so many people around to have those conversations with. So, it's had an impact for sure.
I think that's like a really important thing to realise as a white person listening to that and listen to this conversation at home, is that I never had to deal with that personality restraint. Like when I was going through school, I was crazy at school. I was outlandishly myself at all times, and it got me into trouble and stuff a few times. But I was like being happy and being yourself is like a big part of growing up, and I think like that's definitely something that I think you're now changing with your kids. Would you say that stigma and that feeling has gone away a bit now, or?
I think they're probably more well equipped to deal with the process than I was, and I think my oldest, who is 13, she is so confident in herself and who she is, and being a woman with opinions and being a mixed race woman with opinions, she's really confident in herself. But I think part of that is because she only really remembers me as me now. She doesn't get to meet Dion, who was 17 and struggled with it. So she thinks that this is just how mixed race women are. And I guess that's one of the positives of growing up at a time where there are role models, because I didn't have any mixed race role models. I was saying to somebody the other day, unfortunately, I have to admit that I'm starting to go a little bit grey now. And I had never seen a mixed race woman with grey hair until like the last 10 years, because there weren't very many of them around. So I didn't know what it looked like. I couldn't see what I was going to look like as an older woman. Not that I'm an older woman yet.
So how old are you and you're only now going grey?
You're taking
I'm going grey and I know I'm younger than you.
I am definitely not going to mention how old I am right now, but I am going grey. And I'd never seen mixed race women with grey hair. I'd not seen very many black women with grey hair, really, until my nan started going grey. So that wasn't something that I'd ever seen. But I guess my children get to see that, and that my children have more role models around them just within our family who are mixed race and older. And so they've got those people to look up to. So I think that helps them with their identity. But I think it would have been difficult for my mum and dad as well, because they both came from one perspective or the other. I'm really lucky that I had both my mum and dad around, but my dad came from the perspective of growing up in a white family in London, and my mum came from the perspective of growing up in a black family who had, her parents had moved to this country, and then she grew up as a black woman in the middle of all the racism in this country. So her experience was different to mine as well. So they didn't necessarily have the same identity questions. So I think my children have benefited from me exploring that a bit, and probably from me being around other young people who have explored it. But yeah, it's a very different time to grow up than when you're literally just a minority face in a massive crowd of white people. It's very different.
Did you struggle with having a role model? Because I know I did. I don't know about you both,
Yeah.
but I really struggled with having a role model or someone to look up to that looked like me up until last year, maybe.
That was a question I was going to ask as well,
Okay.
about like in that element of Black history. Like, who were your role models growing up? Was there anyone that you really, was it easy, or was it so difficult to actually find someone within the society and the media and the culture that we live in that you could fully relate to?
I found it difficult, because one, there wasn't really any in like my immediate life that I could look up to. But even like on telly, how can you look up to somebody that's on telly that's in a film? You know, when I think of when I was little in the late 90s, Will Smith was a big deal back then. But I can't look up to Will Smith as a role model, because Will Smith in one film is fighting off zombies, and in another film he's this. How can I look up to that as a role model? Because it's not real. So it's probably only the last couple of years that I've sort of found someone that I don't even model myself over, but look at what they're doing and makes me feel like it's okay to be myself and to have these conversations. And that's Ian Wright. I don't know if you ever listened to his podcast, talking about podcasts. His podcast, there's one and he's talking about being the comedic relief in the room, and that he had real problems when he first went on Match of the Day, because he always felt that he was just the comedic relief in the room.
Yeah.
And they'll play on that. And that's something that you've got to be aware will get played on. And that's why when you go into a conversation, and regardless whether it's football, it's the industry we work in, could be anything, you've got to know your shit. And I sort of feel that pressure a little bit of making sure I know my shit when I'm having those conversations. Because if not, you end up just being the funny black guy who'll crack a joke, and he's wild, you know, he's crazy, he'll do all these crazy things. You have to make sure you know what you're talking about. And another thing that he did was when he talked about his history, and that, you know, he cries, he dresses up as Disney princesses with his sisters and with his daughters and things like that. And he's soft, as most people would sort of say. And there was a program he did, I think it was only a one-part documentary about his life when he was growing up, and all the things that he faced and all the problems that he had, and, you know, meeting these different people that helped him. And he cries talking about these things. And whenever I had interactions with black people as I was younger, it was very much, you've got to be tough. You've got to have this tough exterior, because this is going to come at you in life, and you're going to have these problems, so you have to be tough. And it wasn't that it wasn't okay to cry, but it was a sign of weakness, because you had to be tough and you couldn't let them get to you, kind of thing. And it's like I said, only the last year, 2 years, watching all the different things he's doing, it's kind of like, okay, it's okay to be myself, to cry if I'm sad about something, to be stupid with, you know, my niece or my nephew or my friend's kids, and be myself, not just this tough exterior all the time.
Yeah.
So it's the only last, like I said, 24 months maybe that I've found someone as a role model. But I don't know about you two, if you had that same issue.
I think because my mum was black and being
Okay,
brought
yeah.
up and pretty much being born, you know, raised by my mum as a single parent. And my mum always worked various jobs to give me the best thing I do. And I was the number one Suffolk tennis player for many, many years, under 16, and I used to travel here, there and everywhere. And tennis is a majority white sport. So the two iconic sports women that you always look at is Serena and Venus Williams.
Yeah.
And still I look up to them this day because they were raised by their family. I think there was quite a few siblings, but the dad brought them up as the tennis coach. And actually there's a film coming out about that, which is amazing, I think. But I always looked up to them. But in sport and what I did, you know, me and there was this other young black boy, and we used to go to tennis together and travel all around the country because his mum was also a single mum. So our mums supported each other, and his mum was white actually. But they used to think that we were brothers and sisters all the time. Wow. And we, you know what? We used to play mixed doubles together, and they used to think we're brothers and sisters. Yeah. We had different surnames. You know, they'd Sim, you know, him with his white mum and me and my black, but your brother and sister. But yeah, that's my icon growing up in sport. But my mum is definitely my idol because she's strong. She will challenge somebody if she doesn't think that's politically correct. She's actually a teacher in a high school, and she tries to educate young people as much as possible. Even teachers. Of why you can't say these things and why you do these things. And I think that is the reason why my mum is in that job, because a teacher, you always get to see as many kids as possible. In other jobs, you were kind of naive to it because you're just working with, but at the younger, like I said earlier, at the younger age, you can make a difference to someone. It's probably why we're all in the job that we are. Well, why I want to work at, why I work in the young people's team is because you can make a difference there. But yeah.
And do you think like that would have been much harder to fit in that tennis environment if there wasn't these two women that pretty much dominated tennis for like
definitely
15, 20 years pretty much? Like,
but they used to always say, you know, like little things, like you said, look like brother and sister. You say, oh, you're going to be like Serena Williams. Why can't I be like Sharapova or, you know, all these other players that you had back in the day that were like Eastern European and things like that? Why did my way of tennis, the way I used to play it, because of my athleticism, because of how muscly I was, how athletic I was, you know, all these sorts of things. But yeah, definitely if I didn't have that, and I'm sure that's probably why you wouldn't have so, like now you have in tennis, ethnic backgrounds going, you know, you have this Asian girl at the moment that everyone is going crazy for. So I think it's amazing to see that. So things are changing, but I don't want to touch on it, but actually I was at Wembley the other day at the Hungary match, and I was with my little cousins, and we saw the racism there. Really? So we were literally on the next stand, and we can see what was happening.
Was that from Hungary fans or England?
Yeah, from the Hungary fans, and you know, you've got someone there who's just gone to do their normal job, and to be racially discriminated like that in their job, that you don't know what's going on at home, what position they're in. I think that's completely...
The two things on that I think are interesting is, have either of you been to Hungary before?
No.
I've been. Nothing. Couldn't even believe it when I've heard. It's only the last couple of years that it's been really brought to light all the things that have happened with Hungary fans. I was shocked because I've been twice now, and there's not even once been a hint of anything that would. There's other countries I've been to, and there has been. Even the country I'm from, I've had it. But like, there's one place I haven't even seen it. And the other thing, which maybe is a conversation for another day, for a much longer conversation around specifically sports stars. Yeah. The big piece that came out a couple of years ago on the descriptive words used for players from African or Caribbean descent. They're like, Steven Gerrard will go and put one in the top bins from 40 yards, and he's crafted this perfect goal. Michael Essien does it, who's from Ghana, and it's all about power. Why is it that, you know, why is it if you're an African footballer, you can't be skillful and be good at your craft, you're just powerful, you're this battering ram, you're these different things? But that's a conversation for another day. I think.
But I'm definitely not saying, because I'm not stereotyping Hungary to be at all. You know, because I worked in London for 10 years. I worked in a retail store in Croydon, and probably, like I said before, it's like one of the most populated boroughs in London with the most diverse backgrounds, you know. And when I was a store manager, I made sure that I employed a range of backgrounds and where people were from, so because we are open to the public, you know, and in any employment or employer, you have to have this. And even from the top in government, we need to see more black figures, because we cannot ask them to make a change if they are not educated themselves. So for it to filter down, we can't just keep doing it at ground level, you know, in the jobs that we do and who we meet. But if we do not have black icons in Parliament and, you know, higher paid jobs and directors and charities and things like that, we cannot change anything.
And that comes back to role models again, though, doesn't it? Because it for me, I always think about that phrase that you can't be what you can't see. And if we can't see people of all different walks of life in lots of different positions within the community, within our society, within places of power, then actually we're never going to change that. And the way that Parliament looks at the moment is very, very white. And the way that the powerful and decision-making boards look in most organisations is very, very white. So we do need to make a change when it comes to that. We do need to create role models for young people. I definitely didn't feel as though there were many role models. I don't think I had any role models who were not white. I mean, obviously you look up to your family, and I do have a lot of strong black women around me in my family, and naturally I looked up to them, but they didn't look like me and they didn't do the kind of jobs that I wanted to do. And so I definitely felt as though I had to go out and carve a path for myself. So I think we do have a responsibility to ensure that there are visible people who are really good at what they do, not putting them there because they're black, but we just make sure that there's equity so that people get the opportunity to take the pathway that suits them, that suits their skills, and that recognises their abilities regardless of what their race is. But equity is different to equality. It's about making sure that we break down some of those barriers that are in place if you're from certain groups within the community.
Right. I mean, we're getting towards the end, I think, of our time limit. So I thought we've actually covered everything on my notes, just in some crazy order. We've got around everything.
We have done everything.
And I think we've done
Always happens, doesn't it?
everything, but it's gone quite well, you know. It's been quite nice. All the nerves left my body about 7-8 minutes in, and then now I'm all right. But I thought we may as well end on some quick fire questions, because there's a few like ones that I'd just love to hear your answers to. I think.
I don't know if I can do quick. I am one of those people. Why use 10 words when I can use 100?
Well, I suppose anyone can jump on it. So I'll just read it out, and then if someone's got, it just clicks and they've got a nice answer that they can think of, then go for it. And if not, we'll snip it out. Just like I'm going to probably caption that Dion saying, I don't want to admit it, but I've got a grey hair. I think I'm going to put that in a birthday card. So when you open the birthday card, it'll just play that sound.
Just you wait, I'll get my own back.
Right, so favourite black musician. How's about that for a start? That's a big part of my education.
For me, it's always going to be Bob Marley.
Bob Marley.
Because he did try and talk about different nations coming together.
Yeah, uniting people.
And because he came to London, and then when he went back to London, they did a free concert back in Jamaica. And there's always going to be Three Little Birds. That song is, you know, it's just trying to talk about, you know. I'm trying to like sing the song in my head,
Just sing it. Go on.
But it was just all about equal. It was just all about equal opportunities and about being united as people and making changes together. And we need to stop violence and you know, be as one, and just talked about love and things like that. And that is, and Bob Marley died years ago of a cancer in his toe, and because he's a Rastafarian, he wouldn't have surgery, you know. But imagine him today still singing them songs. And if you now look in music, there's not really too many people talking about those things.
You look through his, like, you were just listing some of like the messages for his songs, but like the messages are endless, like around like love and uniting and standing up for yourself. Like, love the answer. Has anyone else got a musical?
Mine's quite recent, and I agree with everything you've said, but mine is just because he's someone that I think, I'm a bit like that. Childish Gambino or Donald Glover. He's stupendously talented in so many different things.
So unfair.
I think everything, and his beard is ridiculous. But it's because he like raps about things that are typically not black. Like he talks about how he's really into things like comic books, and he's really into things like Dragon Ball Z and all these different things that I watched growing up, that I kind of thought, well, this is odd because none of my other black friends, they're too busy doing this. And it kind of like, okay, there is another one like me out there somewhere. That's what it was for me, is that loads of things he talks about and raps about, I'm like, I get that inside joke because I've watched that programme. But I also get this inside joke because I'm black. But I also get this inside joke for that. So that's for me, it's an easy one.
Oh, quality. Dion, have you got one?
I was just thinking that if I had to narrow it down, I think mine would be Aretha Franklin, but it's as much because she's a woman as because she's black as well. And I think she was a formidable force, but not in a way that she shouted about stuff. She kind of learned the way of the business, and she learned about the barriers and things that existed, but she found a way through without being noisy about it, without being bolshy about it. She just had a real grace about it. And she really was a powerful, strong, but graceful woman that produced the most amazing music that's timeless. So yeah, she'd be mine.
Nice. Actually, I'll add it anyway, because a big part of my experience of Black history started with music, and so I'd like to say shout out to Tribe Called Quest, the first hip hop sort of group I listened to, and from there explored the whole world of hip hop, which stayed with me. So
classic hip hop.
Thoughts on the current government's response to Black Lives Matter and tackling racism?
Not enough.
Try and be quick.
Not enough.
Yeah, I don't think we have enough time to answer that, really. Just because I think, like you said, there isn't enough, but there's so many different avenues that you can go in to with that I can't narrow that down personally to a couple of second or couple of words.
No, definitely not. Yeah. Like Dame Doreen Lawrence that you spoke about earlier, there's women like that who've had that lived experience, should be in government. That's the people who she spent all her life trying to get justice for her son in a racial discrimination murder. And she fought for years to get justice. And until people like that are given the pedestal and the opportunity, she shouldn't have to fight that hard to get that. If she's had to fight all that year to get justice, if something else happens, it makes it acceptable, doesn't it, if it takes that long to kind of get that. So.
One thing you're optimistic about in terms of the future? Leave it on a high note.
Young people. It's got to be young people. I come into contact with not as many young people as I used to, actually, but obviously heading up young people services, we work with a lot of young people and a lot of adults who work with young people, and I find it really, really inspiring to know that there are people like these two that I get to work with every day who are passionate about change and passionate not about necessarily having to do all the change themselves, but inspiring and empowering other young people in the community to reflect on themselves, their position, their experiences, give them opportunities to use their lived experience to make changes. So I'm always, to quote Whitney, I do believe the children are our future, but I feel really lucky and really privileged to work with a team of people who are amongst those in the community that want to lift young people up in order to be the change that we need to see and to empower them to do that. And I feel that I'm always really grateful that I get to do the work that I do because we can create those opportunities, and I think that's really important.
I think that we're just starting to have these uncomfortable conversations that have been needed for a long time.
Definitely.
That's the biggest thing for me. I'm having them with, friends and family that are a lot older than me, and a lot of them know a lot more about the world, but don't know as much about the type of things that maybe they should, living in the sort of the world that we're in now. Those conversations are coming thick and fast, and I think we need to keep having them. I think we don't need to get bored and stop, really.
Celebrating diversity.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's a good one.
What would you say to a white person that feels threatened by Black Lives Matter?
Don't be scared to walk in a room full of black people.
I think you need to spend some time reflecting on yourself. If that's how you feel, then you need to take yourself into a room, have a little word, reflect on your own white privilege, and then come back and have a conversation when you've grown up a bit. Because if you're feeling that strongly about it, then I would suggest that you have some issues around racism that you need to spend some time dealing with. And that's not my problem. That's not my responsibility. That's your responsibility. So go and have a word with yourself and then come back to me when you're ready to talk about it.
Mic drop.
Do you know what do you know? Just looking at some
That was
of
a
the,
bit raw, that one.
That was like we wanted to say that at the beginning the whole time.
I was thinking about my ex.
She wants her own show.
you know what I sometimes use when I'm trying to explain to my white friends when they're scared about the whole BLM thing and whether they can say the N word or not, is I sometimes say, how do you feel if I call you a because, okay, it's not the same, but that level of insult, you're getting towards how it feels when you call someone the N-word. You're on the right path. If you understand how it feels for someone to aggressively call you that, then that's probably that's the first step of the staircase to understand how it feels to be called the N-word.
Well, yeah, we'll wrap it up here then. It's good. I've still got loads of questions, but that can be another day maybe. Who
Another
knows?
podcast, another day.
Who knows? But yeah, thank you very much for obviously coming and letting me and Dion organise this sort of thing. I'm very honoured to be sat here, so it's been great. Thanks very much. I suppose we're signing out. Thanks for listening to the Access Community Trust podcast, produced by Sunrise Studios. And thanks for making it this far. So goodbye.